Mystery 85 here. Once again, I've got questions that people wanted answered, and I'm going to answer some of those questions for you. So, somebody wanted my personal take about how I felt about the centrifugal supercharger versus the positive displacement blowers. As you know, I've had this Vortech V7. It's an experimental supercharger, actually, one of the first ones that Vortech produced. I sent it back to Vortech and I had them to rebuild it, but hey, this supercharger, when I had it on the Green Cobra, lasted for over 100,000 miles without any issues, and we had over 255,000 miles on a stock block 2-valve NPI engine. So this actually is going to reiterate some of the reliability of the superchargers, some of the differences I've seen between the two types of superchargers. So one thing that was to note, I always was a fan of Vortech. I always was a fan of the centrifugal supercharger, which affectionately on the internet forums is called a ProCharger sometimes, but ProCharger is a brand, so we must understand ProCharger is a brand. The type of supercharger is a centrifugal supercharger or a Wu-Tang spinny thing driven by a belt. So it definitely has a volume like a turbo, but it's not driven by exhaust gases. It's driven by the engine, accessories, the belt. We have Rude Style as a positive displacement blower. There's a lot of discussion about those as well. One of the things I noted personally about those, especially some of the Kenne Bell superchargers non-intercooled, especially if they're not intercooled, they're very hot. They're very hot, so you're going to have to be careful with everything when you're running those. So some of these superchargers have fundamental differences. One of the fundamental differences, obviously, between the centrifugal supercharger and a positive displacement blower is where it's mounted. As you see, a centrifugal supercharger is mounted on the front of the engine or somewhere on the front to the side, depending on the type and model of car. A positive displacement blower is mounted directly on the top. Of course, the throttle body in this situation for the centrifugal supercharger is after the supercharger. On a positive displacement blower, it's before it. And these are some small differences that you'll see. Obviously, your positive displacement blower is going to be something like the 2.1 Kenne Bell that is on the white Cobra. In this case, on the Green Cobra, while I did have the NPI 2-valve engine in there, the centrifugal supercharger was very reliable, and I ran it non-intercooled and with water method injection the entire life of the car without any issues. Here on the Marauder, of course, we're using the ADTR high performance kit, which is the Vortech JT trim supercharger. It's a race blower, and that came with a very large intercooler, and I'm utilizing that intercooler on this setup, and it works great. I have no issues with it. The intake air temperatures from these superchargers is a lot better than the positive displacement blowers, and that's something that I've noted between all the setups that I've done. Seeing that the 98 Cobra was a B-head Cobra engine, which has a lot of issues with velocity because of the twin ports, twin intake ports, and being very high volume but low velocity heads, we went ahead and threw a positive displacement blower on it because positive displacement blowers tend to make more power and torque down low than they do up high in the RPM range, such as a centrifugal supercharger would do, where they'll actually continue to build RPM and boost into the efficiency range of the blower and continue to do so. Those positive displacement blowers put that power in just right at the beginning, and they are a little harder on the engine. In this case, the 2.1 liter is non-intercooled. So with that being non-intercooled, it actually creates a lot of heat, a very large amount of heat. We're seeing intake temperatures on that car that are all the way into the upper 200s, and I think actually it topped the sensor out and got into the 300s. Thankfully, E85 is there to save the day, and of course meth injection will also be there to save the day as well. For that, here on this centrifugal supercharger, and this blower is actually capable of moving more air than the Kenne Bell was or is in the 2.1 liter size. I'm seeing temperatures as low as ambient in wide open throttle. So it's a very big difference, and of course this is an intercooled versus a non-intercooled setup. But even the cars that are intercooled on the positive displacement blower side, I see a difference. Of course, lower end torque being there is also harder on the engine, high load, Low RPM is a very hard combination on the engine. And while these centrifugal blowers, when not pulleyed down a lot, don't make as much torque on the lower end, I have to tell you, it pulls pretty damn hard and it pulls great at the bottom and at the top. And these cars being C-head Cobra or 9-thread head engines worked a lot better with lower end torque than the B-head Cobra engines did. So that was very apparent just going NA to NA, where this car felt actually a little stronger. Being a big Marauder, it felt stronger stock on the lower end than even the B-head Cobra did, being a much lighter car at about 3,400, 3,500 pounds curb weight, being a convertible. Those are some fine differences. Tuning the two is definitely different. The programming is different somewhat, just based on where you're actually using what I would say the power band, the usable power band of the supercharger. But this blower being bigger and having a higher efficiency range, a higher CFM, the flow of the supercharger, the airflow, it just feels better. Now the Cobra is definitely faster than the Marauder. I guess that's a bet. We could actually put that on the track and maybe see which one's faster, pending driver mod. And we can go back to back, click, click one in, click one out. But the Marauder is very tame and feels great across the power band. Now for a car this size, I would have definitely suggested maybe going to a positive displacement blower, because that lower end torque is great for getting a car this big moving off the line quickly. But being that I'm personally a high-end person myself, and I had the supercharger already because the Green Cobra is going to get a different supercharger, we went ahead with it anyway. So at the end of the day, we kind of split the differences. There's more than enough torque. It doesn't burn the wheels off. It hooks and it goes and it pulls at the top. The pull is phenomenal. I've actually embarrassed some cars out there, especially the Coyote GTs, probably in closer to stock trim form, of course, not fully modded. But the car shows out. It definitely shows out, and it does what it needs to do out there in the great streets of Mexico, if you will. So we have a few different things. Let's get into that.